The narrator begins to sense something shifting in her marriage. Her husband's excuses about staying late at work no longer align with the rhythm of their life. His voice carries a new strain, his schedule a new pattern of absences that do not quite add up. She pushes down her unease, trying to believe the man she once trusted completely. But the unease grows. A forgotten receipt, a faint scent on his shirt, and finally the alarming gaps in his routine lead her to install a discreet tracker in their shared car. When his next late night arrives, she follows the quiet blinking dot across town, discovering a furnished apartment she has never seen nor heard of. Inside are signs of a second life she was never meant to witness, including clothing and belongings that belong to another woman. This revelation shatters her sense of safety. What follows is a slow, deliberate path through heartbreak, investigation, confrontation, and ultimately a reckoning that extends beyond just the two of them. His betrayal spreads ripples into family, friends, and community, exposing a truth he can no longer hide. She refuses to lose herself in vengeance but seeks dignity, justice, and the courage to rebuild. The story ends with renewal, self-respect, and a quiet reminder that healing does not erase the past, but it does reclaim the future. When I saw the taillights of my husband's car disappearing into that foggy stretch of road, something inside me sank so deep I could almost hear it settle. It was the kind of heaviness you do not mistake for simple worry. No, this was the quiet warning a heart gives before it breaks. I remember the way the night felt around me. Thick, still, too still, like the world was holding its breath right alongside me. I did not know the full truth yet, but I knew enough to feel the tremor of it rising beneath my feet. And even then, I kept telling myself that surely I must be wrong. Surely the man I had loved for so many years could not be the source of this cold dread sitting behind my ribs. But I suppose that is how betrayal begins. Not with loud accusations or scattered evidence, but with a single moment that feels off, and a woman trying her hardest to smooth it back into the shape of normal. Before all of this, our home had its own kind of gentleness. Each morning, I would wake to the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the warm smell of the coffee he loved to brew too strong. He would sit at the table in that worn blue shirt he favored and spread the newspaper out in front of him, humming under his breath. I would pack our lunches while he teased me about always tucking little napkins into his bag as if he were a schoolboy rather than a grown man with a degree and an office of his own. There was comfort in those small routines. The way they told me we were solid, steady, safe. Our friends used to say we were the calm couple, the pair that never bickered in public, that always knew how to lean into each other's moods. He had a way of speaking softly, of always appearing patient, and I believed it was because he loved me deeply. Maybe I still believe that on some distant level, though the truth has shown itself to be far more complicated. I worked at a small design studio then, nothing too demanding but enough to keep my days full. I liked to come home to the sound of his key turning in the lock, the familiar rise of his footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes, he brought home a box of pastries from a bakery near his office. Sometimes, he came home late, but with explanations that felt reasonable enough. A traffic jam, a meeting that ran longer than expected, a client crisis he needed to contain. I never questioned it. Not then. Life felt ordinary, warm, stitched together with the kind of small joys most people ignore. Dinners on the couch, lazy weekends tending to the plants on the balcony, his hand brushing mine as he reached for the salt. These were the pieces that made up our rhythm. And I was proud of that rhythm, proud of the home we had built, one quiet moment at a time. But looking back now, I see there were little shifts in the air before the storm truly rolled in. His laughter grew thinner, like someone had wrung the sincerity out of it. He held me with arms that seemed to hover instead of settle. And sometimes, when he thought I was not watching, his eyes drifted into some distant place I could not reach. I told myself everyone has phases, busy seasons, heavy workloads. I told myself marriage asks for patience, for understanding, for grace. And so I gave all of that. I gave it freely, willingly, because I believed we were still walking in the same direction. But the first real change arrived quietly, so quietly that at first I barely noticed. It was in the way he started keeping his phone face down, in the way a tightness crept into his voice whenever I asked how his day had gone. He used to tell me everything in soft, unhurried detail. Lately, he began offering only pieces. A short sentence, a vague explanation, a shrug. Still, I kept smoothing the worry down, pressing it flat like the wrinkles in our bedsheets. Then came the late nights. At first it was once a week, then twice, then more frequently. until coming home after dark seemed to be the new routine. His tie would hang loose around his neck, but not in the charming, exhausted way it once did. No, this was different. His eyes carried a flicker of agitation, something sharp and restless, and when I moved toward him, hoping to kiss his cheek or ease the tension from his shoulders, he would pull away almost imperceptibly. Almost. I remember the night the unease first planted itself in me fully. He told me he would be working late again. His tone was flat, rehearsed. He did not meet my eyes. I felt a small chill run through my body, though the room was warm enough. After he left, I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the clock as if it held some answer I had not yet uncovered. Hours passed, too many. When he finally walked through the door, his shirt was freshly pressed, his hair was neat, and there was no trace of the long, stressful day he claimed to have endured. I tried to speak, but the words lodged in my throat, so instead I just studied him, memorizing the new things I was noticing. The faint smell of a perfume I did not own. The way he avoided touching me altogether. That night, sleep did not come. I lay awake listening to the steady sound of his breathing, wondering how long it had been since I truly knew the man sharing my bed. It would be easy to say I should have acted sooner. That intuition whispered too many warnings. But the truth is, love teaches us to look at the cracks and convince ourselves they are only shadows. I held on to hope a little longer than I should have, because letting go felt too much like admitting defeat. But change does not wait for permission. It arrives when it is ready, and it was already slipping through the seams of our life. I could feel it gathering itself. I could feel something shifting beneath the surface of the ordinary, and though I still clung to the comfort of our past, my heart had begun to brace for the truth I was not yet ready to face. Before the shadows began stretching long across my marriage, my life had a quiet order to it. It was the kind of order that grows from years of shared routines, shared meals, shared laughter that softens even the hardest days. When I look back now, I understand why the loss hit me so deeply. It was not just the betrayal. It was the breaking of something I had tended with such care. Our home sat on a small corner lot where the morning sun always seemed to land just right. Light would drift through the kitchen window and splash across the countertops, and I would stand there, warming my hands around a cup of coffee. My husband used to slip his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin lightly on my shoulder. He always smelled faintly of cedar, and the soap he preferred. It was one of those scents that anchored me. Safe. Familiar. He worked at a local firm, managing projects that demanded long hours, but he had always carried those hours with a kind of steady professionalism. Even when exhausted, he found room for softness with me. He would sit at the table after dinner, rubbing slow circles on my hand while telling me about some colleague who never refilled the office printer or a client who demanded impossible deadlines. I would listen, resting my cheek against my knuckles, enjoying the way his eyes glowed when he laughed. On weekends, he would wander out to the yard with a small plastic rake and tend to the fallen leaves, humming tunes he barely remembered the words to. Sometimes I watched him from the window, the golden light catching on his hair, and I felt grateful for the life we had built. There was a sweetness in those years, a steady closeness, a sense that whatever storms came would find us leaning together instead of apart. I worked at a design studio a few streets away. Most days, I walked to work, enjoying the rhythm of the morning city. The bakery on the corner always smelled of fresh bread. The sound of sweeping brooms and distant traffic blended into a gentle song that carried me from one hour to the next. I liked creating color palettes and layouts, watching blank spaces turn into something thoughtful and expressive. Sometimes I brought drafts home and asked his opinion. He always offered it freely, even if he understood little about design. He cared because it mattered to me, or at least I believed that once. Evenings were my favorite part of the day. I would come home first, turning on the small lamp in the living room that cast a warm glow over our couch. The air always felt welcoming, soft, peaceful. He would arrive a bit later, loosening his tie, slipping off his shoes, and landing beside me with a quiet sigh. We made simple meals: stir-fry, grilled vegetables, soup simmered with ginger and herbs. We ate slowly, talking about things as mundane as grocery lists or upcoming birthdays. It never felt unimportant. It felt like stitching two lives together, thread by thread. Our friends often said we were the kind of couple others looked up to. The calm ones. The solid ones. Not perfect, but steady. We had our small disagreements, of course. Everyone does. but they never grew sharp enough to wound. I trusted him deeply. That trust was not blind. It was built, layered through years of showing up for each other. Or so I believed. Sometimes he would take my hand without saying anything. He had this quiet way of grounding me, of reminding me we were in this life together. He liked to kiss my forehead when I was stressed, a gesture so gentle it felt like an entire conversation. His love language was small acts of thoughtfulness. Mine was consistency. For a long time, we met each other in the middle. I share all of this not to mourn what once was, but to explain the weight of what came after. Betrayal does not strike hardest against a hollow life. It strikes where there is warmth, where there is history, where there is comfort that once felt unshakable. That is why it stings with such fierce honesty. Because it reveals that even the most tender moments can be held up by someone who no longer stands where you thought they did. Our life looked ordinary from the outside. 2 careers. 1 home. Meals shared. Bills paid. Childhood stories exchanged with laughter. We attended family gatherings. We bought small gifts for each other without needing a special occasion. There was so much good woven into our days that I never imagined anything could be unraveling beneath the surface. Yet even then, small signs flickered at the edges. A pause too long before he answered a question. A faint distraction in his eyes. A new habit of keeping his phone slightly out of reach. Little things, too small to call suspicious. Too small to accuse, but still. They nudged against my peace, asking questions I was not ready to entertain. Life continued as usual. He left for work. I watched from the doorway, waving as he backed out of the driveway. He used to blow me a playful kiss through the window. Lately, that had turned into a simple nod. I noticed, but I did not let myself dwell on it. When you love someone, you learn to explain away the things that do not fit. We spent a weekend visiting his sister, laughing over old family stories. Nothing seemed strange then. His smile looked as real as it ever had. His hand still reached for mine when we crossed the street, and I remember thinking, maybe I am overthinking. Maybe the heaviness in my chest is nothing more than stress or tiredness. We returned home, tucked ourselves into bed, and the lamp glowed softly on his face as he drifted into sleep. I stared up at the ceiling, listening to rain tapping softly against the window, telling myself everything was fine. But deep down, something had already shifted. Something I could not yet name. Something I could not yet see. And even though I tried to bury the feeling beneath routine and hope, the truth was already making its way toward me. That truth would not arrive gently. It would not knock quietly and wait to be welcomed. It would burst open, sweeping through everything I thought I knew, leaving me standing in the wreckage of a life I believed was honest. But at that point, I was still clinging to the comfort of normal life, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The first clue did not arrive with drama. It came quietly, slipping into my life the way a cold draft sneaks beneath a door. At the time, it seemed small enough to ignore, though it left a faint mark on my heart, as if someone had pressed a fingertip against it just a little too firmly. It began one evening when he returned home later than usual. I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, listening to the steady hum of the ceiling fan. The soup simmering on the stove had filled the kitchen with the warm scent of ginger and scallions. I remember thinking he would appreciate it after a long day. When the door opened, I looked up with relief. But the expression he wore did not match the tone of the night. His shoulders were tense. His eyes darted toward the hallway, avoiding mine. He placed his work bag down carefully, almost too carefully, as if he were trying not to disturb something fragile. I walked toward him, hoping to greet him with a small kiss the way we used to. But as I reached out, he shifted slightly, turning his face away in a gesture so subtle I almost missed it. My hand hovered in the air for a moment before I let it fall. "You look tired," I said softly, though inside I felt a small sting of confusion. He nodded without meeting my eyes. "Long day." That was all he offered. I tried to brush it aside. Everyone has off days. Everyone comes home distant sometimes. But that night, when he took off his shirt, I noticed a faint scent clinging to the fabric. It was not mine. It was not our detergent. It was something floral and sweet, something I could not name. My fingers paused as I folded the shirt. That scent stayed with me long after I placed it in the laundry basket. The next morning, he left early. Too early. I stood at the window, watching him drive away. His movements rushed, almost anxious. A strange heaviness settled in my chest, the kind that whispers a warning even when you try to silence it. Over the next few days, my unease grew in small increments. He began checking his phone more often, then sliding it into his pocket quickly whenever I walked into the room. He had never hidden his phone before. He used to leave it on the counter, charging peacefully, unguarded. Now, it seemed to have become a companion he could not separate from. Even when we sat down to dinner, he also started stepping outside to answer calls. I would hear the soft murmur of his voice through the glass door, low and urgent, but the words never reached me. Each time he came back inside, he acted as though nothing were amiss. He would smile, a smile that felt stretched thin, then ask about my day as if reading from a script. The little things continued. A forgotten receipt crumpled in his jeans pocket. A cafe I had never heard him mention. A bill for a gas station nowhere near his office. He brushed them off easily. Too easily. With explanations that sounded practiced. And each time, I nodded, telling myself to trust him. Telling myself not to jump to conclusions. But trust became harder to hold as the days passed. One afternoon at work, I opened the lunch I had packed for him. He always waited for me to put a small note inside. A silly scribble. A warm message. But that afternoon, the lunch I prepared never left our kitchen counter. I found it untouched when I came home, sitting exactly where I had placed it. Yet he had told me he ate during a meeting. The lie was small, but lies rarely begin large. I stood there staring at the forgotten lunch, feeling the shape of worry settle deeper into me. Something was shifting. Something was slipping through the seams of our life, and I did not know how to stop it. He came home late again that night, far later than usual. I watched him walk through the door, the faint glow of the streetlight catching his face. His shirt was neatly pressed, too neat for someone who claimed to have been buried under paperwork all evening. And there it was again, that scent. Soft, floral, lingering on him like a whisper. "Where were you today?" I asked gently. He glanced at me, then away. "I told you, work." His voice carried an edge now, something impatient hiding beneath it. I stepped closer, searching his expression. But he kept his gaze fixed on the floor, as if afraid of letting something slip through his eyes. When we went to bed, he turned away from me far faster than usual. His back formed a quiet barrier. The space between us felt colder than it ever had. I lay awake long after he drifted into sleep. The ceiling above me felt impossibly still. The room too quiet, too unchanged for a heart that was beginning to fracture. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady my breath. Doubt can feel like a second pulse when it grows strong enough. The turning point came the following week. He claimed he would be home late again. I nodded, pretending not to feel the disappointment settling in my stomach. After he left, I walked through our home slowly, absorbing the silence. I needed something, some clarity, some truth, even if I feared what that truth might be. When I reached for my phone, my hand trembled. I stared at it for a long moment, before finally opening the tracking app I had quietly installed on the car weeks earlier. At the time, I told myself it was only for emergencies, only for safety, but a part of me had known even then that I might need it for something more. The blinking dot on the screen appeared steady and calm. Too calm. His car was not at the office. It was traveling down a long stretch of road, far from where he claimed to be. I watched it move slowly, deliberately, toward a part of town we had never visited together. My breath grew shallow. My fingers tightened around the phone. I felt my heart beating in uneven rhythm, like footsteps hitting the pavement in the dark. I followed the dot with my eyes until it stopped near a street name that meant nothing to me. A residential area. Not work. Not traffic. Not a meeting. Something inside me broke open quietly, like a tear in fabric you only notice after the thread has loosened too far. This was no longer suspicion. It was the beginning of truth. A truth I could no longer ignore. The night I chose to follow him, the sky felt unusually heavy, as if it understood what I was about to uncover. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, my hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling the faint tremble in my fingers. The blinking dot on the tracker had stopped moving. His car was parked somewhere still, in a place that did not belong to either of us. I took a slow breath, steadying myself before pulling out of the driveway. The roads were quiet at that hour. Streetlights cast long pools of yellow across the pavement, and each one seemed to pass over me like a silent warning. I kept glancing at my phone, watching the map guide me toward the truth I had tried so hard not to see. The closer I got, the more unfamiliar the surroundings became. Tall apartment buildings lined the street, narrow sidewalks, faint music drifting from open windows. Nothing about this place resembled his world. Nothing connected it to the life we shared. When I finally spotted his car parked neatly along the curb, a cold wave washed through me. There was no office nearby, no client, no restaurant he had ever mentioned, just a quiet building with dim lights glowing behind drawn curtains. I turned off my engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the tick of cooling metal. My heart felt too big for my chest. My palms were damp. Every instinct in me wanted to walk away, to return home and pretend I never saw any of this. But another part of me, the part that had been whispering warnings for weeks, refused to move. I stepped out of the car. The night air hit me with a sharp chill. My footsteps sounded too loud on the pavement as I approached the building entrance. The hallway inside smelled faintly of fresh paint and detergent. Soft carpets muffled each step, making my heartbeat sound even louder in comparison. I looked at the list of unit numbers. His name was nowhere on it, yet the tracker showed his exact location. He was inside this building. I followed the map until it guided me to a door on the 3rd floor. Unit number 26. A place I had never stepped into. A place I was never meant to know existed. Light seeped through the small gap beneath the door. I could hear faint movement inside. Not voices, just the soft shuffling of someone at home in their own space. My hand rose to knock, but it hovered in the air, trembling. I told myself I needed proof. I needed to see, not imagine. Because after this night, nothing would return to the way it had been. When the door opened, I was not met by him. I was met by a woman. She stood there in a soft sweater, her hair pulled loosely over one shoulder. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of me. A stranger she had never seen. Yet it was her expression that told me everything. Recognition, fear, guilt. Not because she knew me personally, but because she understood exactly who I must be. I felt the breath leave my body. I asked quietly, "Is he here?" She hesitated, gripping the edge of the door as though she needed the support. Then she stepped back, allowing me to see past her shoulder. The apartment was furnished, not minimally, not temporarily. It looked lived in. Soft throw blankets, family-style kitchenware, shoes neatly arranged near the doorway, a jacket draped across the back of the sofa. His jacket. My heart cracked with a sound I could almost hear. He appeared from the hallway a moment later. His expression twisted into shock the instant our eyes met. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His face drained of color. I felt my throat tighten. My voice barely rose above a whisper. "How long?" He swallowed hard, looking between me and the woman beside him. His silence was an answer even before he finally spoke. "It has been a while." Those words landed inside me like stones. I took a slow breath, steadying my shaking hands. I looked around again, taking in the small details that betrayed an entire hidden life. A second set of keys on the counter, 2 coffee mugs still warm from recent use, a framed photo on the side table showing the woman smiling on a sunny beach. A smile so open, so unguarded, that I wondered how many days he had spent inside this world, instead of ours. I stepped farther inside, the floor cold beneath my feet. My eyes drifted toward a door slightly ajar near the hallway. Something drew me toward it. A quiet intuition. Inside was a bedroom. Neatly made bed. Soft lamps. Clothes hanging in the closet. Women's clothes. Shoes. Scarves. Dresses. A vanity table with brushes carefully arranged. No trace of me anywhere. Not a single sign of the woman he had promised his life to. It felt like walking into another universe. Behind me, I heard him enter the room, his footsteps hesitant. I turned to look at him, noticing the way he could not bring himself to stand too close. I searched his face for any trace of the man I once knew. Instead, I found only a stranger wearing his features. I asked again, "How long?" His eyes dropped. His voice came out rough. "Longer than I can explain." The woman stood behind him, her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze heavy with guilt. I looked at her, then at him. My voice felt steady even as my heart crumbled. "Is this where you go when you say you are working late?" He closed his eyes. Yes. There it was. The truth. Simple, brutal, irreversible. For a moment, everything around me blurred. I felt suspended in a quiet, aching silence. My lungs fought for air. My pulse thundered in my ears. And deep within me, something sacred broke apart. I walked past him and stopped near the living room, letting my hand rest on the back of the sofa. The fabric felt soft beneath my fingers, too soft for the hardness inside my chest. "You built a life here," A life I never knew existed. He rubbed his forehead, unable to meet my eyes. I never meant for you to find out like this. I let out a soft, humorless breath. There was no graceful way to discover a betrayal of this magnitude. The wound had no gentle edges. The woman finally spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself. I did not know he was still with you. I only found out recently. By then, I was already in too deep. Her words floated toward me, heavy, but sincere. I looked at her for a long moment, seeing not a villain, but a person tangled in a web he had spun. I nodded slowly. The blame did not rest on her shoulders alone. It rested on his. I turned to him again. My voice shook, not with rage, but with sorrow so deep it had weight to it. You looked me in the eye every morning, every night, and carried all of this inside you. How did you do that? How did you split yourself in two and still sleep beside me? He whispered something that sounded like, I am sorry. But the words meant nothing. They floated in the air, empty, powerless against the truth, standing between us. I walked toward the door. My steps felt both heavy and certain. When I reached the hallway, I looked back at him one final time, seeing a man who had chosen a life I was never invited into. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. The betrayal was not in the act itself. It was in the months of lies. The shared meals spoken through half-truths. The tender moments performed with hidden guilt. The nights he kissed me goodnight knowing he would drive here the next evening. That was the wound. That was the fracture. That was the breaking point. When I stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like a reminder that the world was still moving even as mine had stopped. I closed my eyes. The truth had been found. But the pain was only beginning. I drove home that night in silence. The kind of silence that presses into your skin and settles in your bones. The street lights blurred past me in long streaks of gold, but I barely saw them. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned pale. I kept replaying the scene over and over. The apartment, the woman, the shock on his face, the life he had built without me. Every detail landed with a weight I could hardly hold. When I reached our driveway, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the front door. That door had always meant safety, warm meals, shared laughter, the soft comfort of home, but now it felt like the entrance to a place I no longer recognized. Inside, the house was exactly as we had left it. The small lamp in the living room glowed softly. The scent of the candle I lit earlier lingered in the air. Everything looked peaceful, untouched, as if unaware that something had shattered. I walked through each room slowly, my fingertips brushing across the furniture, the photos on the wall, the memories that now felt bruised. The quiet of the house only magnified the noise in my mind. I tried to breathe, but each breath felt too shallow. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that grew cold long before I touched it. My phone sat face down beside me. I kept waiting for it to light up, for him to call, for him to say something, anything. But the phone remained still. In the stillness of that hour, I made a decision. I would not confront him with anger. I would not scream or throw accusations like sharp stones. Dignity still mattered to me, even when my heart was breaking. And if he had chosen to live in lies, then I would choose clarity, truth, and action. So the next morning, I packed a small bag. Just the essentials. A few clothes, my documents, my journal. I moved quietly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile air around me. The sunrise cast long shadows across the floor as I zipped the bag closed. When I heard his footsteps approaching the door, I did not turn away. He entered the house looking exhausted. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. He saw the bag beside my feet and stopped mid-step. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally he asked, "Where are you going?" I lifted my head and met his gaze directly. My voice came out steady, though I could feel the tremor beneath it. "I am giving you the space you already chose without telling me." He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "Please, can we talk about this?" I nodded once. Yes. But talking will not erase what I saw. He stepped closer, his hands hovering in the air as if reaching for me but unsure if he deserved to. I watched him carefully. The man standing before me looked nothing like the steady husband I once trusted. His face carried the weight of choices made in shadows. He began softly. "I never meant for it to go this far." I felt a sharp ache in my chest. How strange it is, the words people choose when they have already crossed every line. My voice stayed low, calm. "It went far enough to become a second home. Far enough for you to build a life that did not include me." He lowered his head. I am sorry. The words felt hollow, thin, like a cup with a crack in the bottom. No matter how much he poured into them, they could not hold meaning anymore. I walked past him and placed my keys on the table. I will not stay and pretend I am whole. I need time. I need truth. And I need distance from the place where you spent months lying beside me while giving your heart somewhere else. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. I never stopped loving you. I paused, letting those words settle in the air. Then I looked at him with a steady sadness. People do not hide love in secret apartments. He froze. The truth stung both of us, though in different ways. I picked up my bag. He moved forward again. Desperation flickering across his face. Please do not go like this. My heart clenched, but I did not waver. I am not leaving you. I am leaving the version of our life you created without asking me. I walked toward the door. His voice broke slightly as he called my name, but I did not turn back. Some moments require forward motion, even when every part of you wants to collapse. Outside, the air was crisp. Birds sang in the trees as if unaware of the storm inside my chest. I placed my bag in the car and sat there for a moment, letting my breath steady. I did not know where I would go. I only knew I could not stay. I drove to a small guest house near the outskirts of town. The owner was an older woman with kind eyes who did not ask many questions. She handed me a key, and I thanked her with a tight smile. The room was simple. A small bed, a wooden dresser, a window overlooking a quiet garden. I placed my things down and sat on the edge of the mattress. For the first time since discovering the truth, I allowed myself to sob. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a slow release of everything I had held inside. In the days that followed, I began gathering information. Quietly, methodically. I checked our bank statements. I examined his credit card charges. I traced every gap in his schedule. What I discovered painted a clear picture. The apartment was paid in cash. The expenses belonged to him alone. There were no business meetings, no work obligations, only lies carefully layered to protect a life he did not want me to see. I did not confront him a second time. I let the truth settle into me, forming shape and understanding. I spoke to a lawyer. I reached out to a close friend. I documented everything, not out of revenge but out of self-respect. One afternoon, as I stood in the small garden behind the guest house, I realized something important. His betrayal had cracked my world open, but inside that crack was space for clarity, space for change, space for a life rebuilt. Even if the rebuilding frightened me, I was no longer the woman waiting by the window for his car to return. I was the woman who had followed the truth to its doorstep and stepped inside, even when it broke her. And now, I was the woman taking action. The truth has a way of slipping into the world even when you try to hold it quietly. Secrets may begin in shadows, but they rarely stay there. In the weeks that followed my discovery, the quiet distance I placed between us began to stir questions among the people who knew us. Friends noticed my absence at gatherings. His family noticed the strain in his voice. And slowly, the story of what he had done began to move into the light. It started with his sister. She called me one morning, her voice gentle and hesitant. I had not answered her earlier messages, unsure of how much to reveal. But grief makes your voice honest, even when your heart is tired. She asked me if we were all right, if something had happened. There was a tremor in her question, the kind that carried worry rather than gossip. I closed my eyes before speaking. "We are not all right," I said softly. And something did happen. There was a long pause on the line, a silence loaded with fear. "Is it bad?" she asked. "It is deep," I replied. I did not rush my words. I simply told her the truth, piece by piece, without anger, without dramatics. I told her about the apartment, the woman, the months of lies. I could hear her breath catch, followed by a soft sound of disbelief. "I am so sorry," she whispered. I never imagined he could do something like that. Neither did I. She grew quiet again before saying she would talk to him. She wanted him to understand the weight of what he had destroyed. She promised she would not dismiss my pain, and she did talk to him. I learned later that their conversation ended with raised voices, something rare between them. She called me afterward, her voice thick. "He admitted everything," she said. "He said he did not know how to stop once he started." I do not know what he was thinking. I thanked her gently, not because her words fixed anything, but because she cared enough to speak truth to him. News travels in subtle ways. Soon his parents reached out too. They asked to meet with me. I hesitated, but something inside me knew it mattered. Not for him, but for closure. We met at a quiet cafe. They arrived with tired eyes and heavy hearts. His mother reached for my hand across the table. Her touch trembled. "We had no idea," she said softly. "If we had known, we would have spoken to him." I nodded, feeling a mixture of sadness and strange comfort. He did not just break my trust. He broke theirs too. They had always embraced me with warmth, treating me like their own daughter. His father cleared his throat. "I do not expect you to forgive him," he said. "But I want you to know that what he did is on him, not on you." A tear slid down my cheek, surprising me with its suddenness. I thanked them both. They offered to support whatever decision I made. Whether I stayed, whether I left. They asked nothing from me in return. Word spread further when a mutual friend noticed him entering the apartment building on a weekday afternoon. She had no reason to suspect anything at first, but after not seeing me with him for several gatherings, she pieced it together and called me gently, asking if I needed someone to talk to. I told her the truth. She listened, her voice warm and steady, offering kindness instead of judgment. The world he tried so hard to divide into two separate lives was beginning to collapse in on itself. At his workplace, things shifted as well. I had not intended for the truth to reach his colleagues, but life has its own way of revealing what people try to hide. One of his coworkers, who knew both of us well, noticed his growing tension, the distracted look he wore, the arguments he stepped outside to have on private calls. Eventually, the rumor of his dishonesty drifted through the office halls. He called me one evening, his voice strained. "People at work know." I remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. "They heard about the apartment," he added. "And they know you left." His voice carried embarrassment, frustration, maybe even fear. But I did not comfort him. Actions create consequences. And these were his. The next weekend, his extended family held a small gathering, something planned long before the truth came out. For years, I had been part of every holiday, every dinner, every celebration. This time, I stayed away. He went alone. Later, his cousin reached out to me. She told me he walked in with downcast eyes, and every conversation around him grew quiet. People were polite, but distant. Not out of cruelty, but out of disappointment. They had admired us as a couple. They had believed in us. And now they were forced to confront the truth that he had broken something cherished. "He left early," she said. "He could not stay long." I thanked her for telling me, not because I took pleasure in his discomfort, but because part of healing is understanding that the world sees what happened, that the pain is not invisible, that the truth has a place beyond your own heart. The woman from the apartment faced her own consequences as well. She reached out to me after some time, sending a short message asking to speak. I agreed to meet her at a quiet park. We sat under the shade of a large tree, the wind rustling the leaves above us. She looked fragile, her hands nervous in her lap. The moment she began speaking, her voice cracked. "I did not know he was still with you. I truly did not. When I found out, I tried to step away, but he kept telling me you were drifting apart, that things at home were breaking." I listened in silence. Her remorse was real. Her pain was real too. Betrayal had a long reach, and it touched more than just me. I told her calmly, "I do not blame you for everything. You were misled. We both were." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "He lied to both of us." Those words settled between us, honest and heavy. After that day, she ended things with him entirely. She moved out of the apartment. She cut contact. She held no interest in continuing a life shaped by deception. In this entire unfolding, I chose not to humiliate him publicly. I did not post online. I did not share details to shame him. I let the truth move naturally, quietly, through the people whose lives were intertwined with ours. The consequences he faced were not orchestrated by me. They were simply the reflection of his own actions, mirrored back at him by the world that once held him with trust. He called me many times, each voicemail carrying a new shade of regret. Some were filled with apologies, others with confusion, others still with a desperation he could no longer hide. But the distance between us grew wider, not because I wanted revenge, but because truth reshapes every path it touches. And by then, I had already begun walking toward a life that did not revolve around his choices. Healing does not arrive all at once. It does not sweep in like a sudden rainstorm, or burst through the door with grand announcements. It comes quietly, patiently. It settles into the empty spaces where pain once lived, filling them little by little with clarity, and then with strength. After the truth had settled between us and the public ripples faded into stillness, I found myself facing a new kind of silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of betrayal, but a gentler one, a silence that allowed me to breathe again. I stayed in the guest house for several more weeks. Each morning, I opened the window to let in the cool air. Birds fluttered across the garden, their soft chirping painting the start of each day with a fragile kind of hope. I took walks along the gravel path behind the property, the sound of stones shifting under my shoes, grounding me in the present moment. For the first time in a long while, I began listening to my own thoughts, rather than the echoes of someone else's choices. My lawyer guided me through the process gently. There were documents to review, decisions to make, steps to take. At first, signing anything tied to the end of my marriage felt like tearing a page out of my own story. But with each passing day, the fear lessened. I began to understand that letting go was not the same as losing. Sometimes letting go is how you save yourself. One afternoon, as I sat beneath a tree in the garden, I wrote in my journal. My thoughts spilled across the page with surprising clarity. I wrote about the years of love, the quiet routines, the laughter that once filled our home. I also wrote about the nights he spent in that apartment, the lies that layered themselves between us, the moment I saw his life without me. And then I wrote something I had not expected. I wrote, "I can forgive him without returning to him." The words startled me. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not excusing. It is not pretending the wound never existed. It is simply choosing not to let the wound define every step forward. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself so you can walk without carrying the weight of someone else's betrayal. I was not ready to say it to him directly, but I was ready to acknowledge it within myself. As the weeks passed, I began reintroducing small rituals into my life. I visited my favorite cafe, ordering the same warm drink I used to enjoy on quiet mornings. I returned to the design studio, immersing myself in color palettes and layouts that reminded me there was beauty still left in the world. My colleagues welcomed me with gentle smiles and unspoken understanding. I leaned on my closest friend, who never once pressured me to move faster than my heart allowed. She listened as I talked through my fears, my doubts, my hopeful moments. She reminded me that healing is not measured by how quickly you move on but by how deeply you learn to stand again. One day, I visited my old home. Not to return, but to collect the rest of my belongings. He was not there. I was grateful for that. The space felt hollow without the presence of the life we once built together. I walked through each room calmly, touching nothing, simply absorbing the quiet goodbyes. When I reached the kitchen, sunlight streamed in through the window, catching the edges of the countertop with a soft glow. I stood there for a moment, remembering the mornings we used to spend together. I allowed myself to feel the sadness without drowning in it. Then I gathered my things and locked the door behind me. Once everything was settled, I moved into a small apartment near the studio. It was modest, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, I lay awake listening to the gentle hum of the city outside. No silent tension. No waiting for footsteps that might carry lies. Just the sound of my own breath, steady and freeing. His messages continued at first. Apologies. Regrets. Questions. He wanted to talk. He wanted to understand. He wanted another chance. But I held my boundary with quiet firmness. I responded only once, with a single sentence. I wish you healing, but I cannot return to what was broken. After that, I blocked his number. Not out of bitterness, but out of peace. His family reached out from time to time, offering support, warmth, and understanding. I appreciated their kindness, but I no longer felt the need to remain attached to something that belonged to a different chapter of my life. Slowly, I began building new routines. I rearranged my furniture until the apartment felt like an extension of my heartbeat. I bought plants and placed them near the windows. I cooked small meals just for myself, enjoying the quiet comfort of each bite. I found joy in things I had forgotten I loved. One evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset bleed into soft shades of amber and rose. The air carried the smell of distant jasmine. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a profound, uninterrupted sense of peace. I understood then that healing is not a single moment of triumph. It is a collection of small, steady steps. It is choosing yourself after years of choosing someone else. It is waking up each morning and allowing the world to expand around you again. There were days when I felt strong and days when the memories tugged at my heart with gentle ache. But even on the hard days, the pain no longer held me captive. It simply reminded me of what I had survived. In time, I learned that my worth was not tied to his choices. My value was not measured by the loyalty he failed to give. My future was not bound to the betrayal he carried out in secret. The life ahead of me was still mine to shape. And as I sat beneath the soft glow of that fading sunset, I realized something I had been searching for all along. I was free, standing here now, on the other side of everything I once feared would break me. I understand that the heart has a quiet strength we often overlook. Betrayal may bruise us, may bend us, may shake the walls we built with trust, but it does not have to define the rest of our story. Healing does not erase the past. It simply turns us gently toward the future. There are nights when I still remember the smell of our old kitchen, the way the morning sunlight touched the countertop, the sound of his laughter before the lies. Those memories come softly, not to reopen old wounds, but to remind me that I once loved deeply and honestly. And loving honestly is never something to regret. Today, my life is simpler, quieter, steadier. I find peace in the small things again. A warm cup of tea, the soft hum of the city outside my window, the feeling of waking up in a home that reflects only truth. I no longer carry the weight of wondering where he is. I no longer question the stories told to me in half shadows. My heart has space now. Space to rest. Space to breathe. Space to grow. In the end, the greatest lesson I learned is this. You can survive a broken truth. You can step out of the wreckage and rebuild yourself with gentleness. You can walk away from what hurt you without carrying bitterness in your hands. And now, I want to ask you something. The same way Auntie May always does at the end of a story. If you had discovered a hidden life behind the man you trusted, would you have followed the truth as I did, or walked away before seeing it with your own eyes? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like this, make sure you subscribe and stay a while.